Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. I hope you all had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. I am back with you going over what happened Tuesday, May 28th in the Chad Daybell trial. As you recall, last Thursday was the last day of court for that week, anticipation of a long holiday weekend, and now we are back. Pretty much the defense rested. There was a couple of rebuttal witnesses that took place for the prosecution on Thursday, and now we are back here. We are coming down to it. Essentially, I'm coming to you on Wednesday, May 29th, and basically what happened is that on Tuesday the 28th is that the state had their last rebuttal witnesses, and basically court was adjourned to go over some administrative stuff, and closing arguments for both the prosecution, the defense, and then rebuttal closing statements for the state will take place today on Wednesday the 29th. But let's go over what happened yesterday on the 28th. Basically, court came to order, and the first matter of business was going over the last two witnesses that will be called today. But one of those witnesses that was scheduled, remember Janice Olson, the co-worker of Tammy Daybell that had testified before, and her testimony on the fact that Tammy told her, or she overheard Tammy, something along those lines, saying that her husband, Chad, wanted her to up her life insurance before she retired. How the testimony of Emma Daybell Murray actually reopened that, because Emma said something along the same lines of, we did this without consulting our husbands. Well, John Pryor still has issue with the fact that Janice Olson was originally released from subpoena, just like he did with Officer Colton, that they had both been released from subpoena and had probably seen further testimony in the trial, and that could have altered what they would say. So he is still arguing that she should not be allowed to testify again. And even though John Pryor thinks that was reintroduced by Emma Daybell's testimony, that he does feel it could be some sort of contradiction to allow her to testify, so she will not be allowed to testify. So that was one of the witnesses that was supposed to testify for the state. Remember, since it's a capital murder case, the state it's an opportunity to call witnesses to repatch up any holes that the defense was able to poke the holes in. So basically, she is stricken from retestifying. And, you have to say this about Judge Boyce. He is fair. He is not going to allow anything to happen that would potentially give Chad Daybell the potential to appeal his way out of this. So it's probably a good thing, I think, between what Emma Daybell said and the testimony that has come out prior. I think the jury is well versed that money was part of this. That's just my educated gut feeling. And so then we go into the very first witness for the state, rebuttal witness. This is the Utah State Medical Examiner, Dr. Eric Christensen. Lindsay Blake will question him. He's basically being called to refute the testimony of the defense's expert, Dr. Kathy Raven. He confirms that he did read the transcript of her testimony and is prepared to talk about his findings. Basically, remember, Dr. Kathy Raven pretty much said that the cause of death should be undetermined because of reasons that she found in her examination, even though she only read Dr. Christensen's records. Dr. Christensen then reiterates that what he's looking for in a non-doctor, doctor-assisted death or doctor overview death is, reasons. He's looking for either toxins, he's looking for medical cause, or he's looking for physical cause of death. And basically, he reiterates that there was no significant pathology in her heart, lungs, liver, anything like that would suggest that she had any ailments, nothing in her medical records, and that there was nothing on the toxicology reports that they did that would indicate she was poisoned. So because of the bruising and the type of bruising, the deep bruising that he saw on her arms, to him suggested that she was physically asphyxiated, and all of his medical findings, including the heavy lung and the red foam, would indicate that she was smothered in some way, either with a plastic bag or a pillow. And I think we know now, because of how 𝗙lie and JJ's deaths were, at least JJ's, were that burning, suffocating, smothering were part of some, and beating were part of some ritual that these psychos had to free the body from whatever demon they think is possessing them. So basically, he pretty much shoots down everything that the defense had offered. Basically, the defense had even, Emma Daybell had actually said that, sleep apnea. Lindsay Blake does ask about sleep apnea, and he says, sleep apnea can kill you suddenly, but it's usually a diagnosed thing that you're under treatment for, and there's usually an underlying heart condition that goes along with it, and nothing in Tammy Daybell's examination or medical record indicated either sleep apnea or a heart condition, that she was an otherwise healthy individual. And also, most people that die from sleep apnea are also obese. She was not obese. So they also go over the fact she was on antidepressants, and they go over all of her herbal remedies. She said there's nothing in the report or his physical examination that would indicate that there was any interaction between either prescription or herbal drugs that would have caused her death. Lindsay Blake has no further questions. Pryor basically asked him if he's heard the term confirmation bias, which is kind of an insult, I think, to the doctor, saying that you're looking for reasons to shoot down anything that doesn't agree with your findings because you're so set on your findings. Confirmation bias. And basically, Christensen says, I'm not going off of just trying to defend my findings. My findings are my findings. This is what I found, and I think based on the other evidence that it's easy to say this was homicide, not undetermined. Pryor then asked if he had spoken to any of Chad's children. He said everything he got came from law enforcement, and if Chad's children had actually given statements to law enforcement, he would have had their statements to use as well, but he did not. Might drop, in my opinion. And then he said that he made the final decision on the autopsy about 14 to 15 months out of the investigation. He said that's common where they suspect foul play, and he took into account any changes the body would have undergone from the time it was killed to the time it was buried. Pretty much, Pryor has no further questions. Blake has nothing further. Then they call, the next witness called is by Rob Wood, is retired police detective David Stubbs, who of course has also testified before and has remained under a subpoena. They talk about Google search history from the Chad.Daybell account. And basically, we see something very weird. We see that Chad researched, or somebody from that account researched, how to turn off location devices on an iPhone on January 3rd, 2019. And then we show that there was, there was significant movement in that iPhone, because Tammy had an iPhone, Chad did not. So there was no significant changes until August 24th, 2019, when a request was made from that very same Chad Daybell account to have Apple turn off all GPS history and turn off the locator going all the way back to 1970. By 1970 is when most cell phone companies started their GPS tracking, or that's their start date, the official start date of the technology. So basically, there was a request sent from that Gmail account to Apple asking that the iPhone information for Tammy Daybell's iPhone, the only iPhone associated with any of the Daybell's accounts, remember everybody else had an Android, that location history be wiped all the way back to the beginning. Very, very telling. And then Pryor, on his cross-exams, brings up the fact that Chad had a Android device, not an iPhone device, and basically said he's aware. He's just bringing up the fact that the only iPhone on the account was Tammy's, and that information, there was a request to wipe all of that GPS location information going all the way back to the beginning. Pryor had nothing further. Wood redirects, and that he brings out that Chad and Lori had an affair. and that Lori had an iPhone. Yes, Tammy may or may not have had a iPhone, had an iPhone as well. So he said it's very telling that an iPhone was asked to be wiped from the beginning of time. Then there's a short break, and then they call Detective 𝗟𝗫𝗁 Lindsay Blake is questioning. They ask him more about his investigation, and then basically they hone in on some of the issues that the Murrays brought out, specifically Joseph Murray, about him driving back and forth on the road at the Daybell property, as well as potentially approaching Emma Daybell at the gym. They first asked if 𝗟𝗫 had ever seen Emma at the gym. He said yes, but he wasn't quite sure who she was. He saw her before he was ever brought in on the investigation. He never approached her. He never talked to her. He never willingly worked out next to her. And then they asked, was there any reason besides watching the Daybells that you would be driving along the road? He said, yes, his family has a business, a dry cleaning business that operates not far from there. And so he would be driving back and forth quite a bit on that road, not necessarily to watch the Daybells. And then pretty much there are no further witnesses. The jury is excused for the day, and then they go over some administrative stuff off. They cut the feed. They go over some administrative stuff off, and then about 3:00 they come back and they're talking about the 41 different jury instructions that will be given to the jury the next day or today, Wednesday the 29th, and how the consideration for the death penalty, since this is a death penalty case, how the Supreme Court of Idaho as recent as May 22nd has updated the instructions to be given to the jurors on how to determine guilt or innocence or not guilt in a death penalty case, and that there's some discussion about whether they'll be given the old rule or the new rule, and Judge Boyd said it's his duty to give the new rules. There's not really a whole lot of difference between the new rules and the old rules, except the new rules pretty much make it clear when they are to find not guilty and when they are to find guilty. Pretty much the difference is that it makes it a lot more clear. Like a reasonable doubt is not considered some roundabout thing, like an angel Moroni came down and told them that Chad Daybell was innocent. That's not the type of reasonable doubt they're talking about. They're talking about a solidified reasonable doubt that leaves just one. You don't have to have several, just one reasonable doubt that a reasonable person feels without any hesitation that this person is not guilty. So if you find those findings, you have to acquit. If you don't have those feelings, you have to find guilty. So they will be going over those new rules, and that will probably take up the first 1 hour of court today. They will not take up until 10 a.m. local time, so it's going to be a late day. It will take about an hour and a half to go over all of the rules and things to the jury. They will then go over the evidence. Part of what they cut the feed for yesterday was making sure that all the evidence was properly numbered and listed so the jury could look at it and it would be available to the jury. They will go over all of that, and then the prosecution will have their closing statements. That will probably take a little over an hour. Then the defense will have their closing statements, and then the prosecution will be given a rebuttal closing statement because it is their case. And then it goes to the jury, and the jury will probably deliberate for whatever time is left on Wednesday, and they will deliberate on Thursday, Friday, probably not over the weekend, but possibly. And then the next thing will be the verdict. And if he is found guilty, we will then enter another phase of the trial, which is determining whether or not he should have the death penalty. And with a death penalty case, they have to first have a guilty, and then they have to the state has to show beyond a reasonable doubt, the same rules, within your heart of hearts, your psyche, that there's not a reasonable doubt that there were aggravating circumstances that make this an egregious case that warrants the death penalty. And in Idaho, that is a inmate killing another inmate, the slaying of a police officer, more than one murder victim. That definitely applies here. And also the fact the mode of death was especially egregious. Now, that's the one maybe it just depends on if the state can prove that they were actually smothered, beaten, burned, to the jury, that might also be an aggravating circumstance to warrant a death penalty. But we definitely know there's more than one victim here. So that is definitely an aggravating case. But it also depends. He may get found guilty of Tammy's, but not the kids, or vice versa. And so all of that's in question. We just have to see what the jury decides. So I'll be back with you tomorrow to cover the closing statements, kind of go over the gist of that, and then we're on wait. We're on jury watch, just like we were with the Lori Daybell trial. Now, basically, if they come back with guilty but do not find him worthy of the death penalty, then Judge Boyce has two options. He can either sentence him to, a specific amount of time, like the minimum for first-degree murder in Idaho is 10 years, so 10 years to life, or he can just sentence him with parole available, or he can just sentence him to life with no parole. So that is what we are looking at, and then there will be a separate hearing where the judge will decide if he's found guilty of insurance fraud and grand theft. Then that's a totally separate sentencing. The sentencing that we're talking about with the jury only applies to the murder charges. So there will be a separate hearing where Judge Boyce will decide the sentence for the insurance fraud and the grand theft if he's found guilty of everything. So it's not a foregone conclusion. I think the case did, the prosecution did a great job in putting forth the case. I don't think that Pryor was able to poke any significant holes in it, and the few that he did. I think the state was able to patch those up pretty well. So we'll see. It's up to the jury. I can't say that I'm a reasonable person when it comes to this because I followed the case from the beginning. They were able to find 17 people, 18 originally. One was dismissed because of illness, that were not significantly tied to the case or had heard a lot about the case. So that is a miracle in itself. And so what would I do if I was in that mindset, not knowing anything about this trial? That's what we have to dwell on. I think what I've heard would pretty well convince me, but again, I'm biased. So what do you think down below? If you had not heard anything about this case before now and you were sitting on that jury, what would your vote be? Guilty or not guilty? Down below. And so that's where we are, just waiting. There will also be a lottery drawing before they close out court today, where they will decide which 5 jurors will not deliberate. So those 5 jurors have sat through this entire trial and will not be able to deliberate. But they do that in case, like you said, we lost one to illness. If we had only had 12, they would have had to stop and chose another juror. So yeah, everything they do is pretty pragmatic. So with that being said, I'll be back tomorrow with what happened today, Wednesday, May 29th, in the Chad Daybell case. And until next time, 𝗙𝗂𝗀𝗄𝗏.